There has always been so much discussion about what happened within the actual show that we seldom ever get the chance to hypothesize about what happened after the main storyline concluded. Between Jack's death on the island and everyone waking up in the Flash sideways simultaneously, a lot of events must have transpired in the living world following the return of Ajira Flight 316, and Hurley's reign on the island. We get a sense of what might have happened afterwards thanks to the epilogue, The New Man in Charge. But there are so many more blanks to fill in. Most of the ideas in this video are going to be based almost entirely upon the implications of the finale, but also what I feel is the logical progression of both the characters and themes of the series as a whole. The showrunners intentionally left this area of the show open for fans to speculate and create their own part of the story. You might imagine entirely different scenarios, and that's fine. More than any other chapter in this series of Lost Explained videos, this one is all about questions that have completely open-ended answers. Let's start with the most clearly defined events post-Jack's death. Hurley's reign as Island Protector. It is clear from how we leave him and Benjamin Linus in the end, that a new era of peace is about to be ushered in on the island. For one thing, there is no more Jacob and Man in Black warring over fate and time. Both island deities have been killed and the 2,000-year-old game has finally come to an end. The immovable yoke, as described on the cork, has been broken. The dead can rest. A question that I have seen asked in regards to the events of the finale is: did Jack become the new smoke monster? The answer is no. Jack did not transform into a new smoke monster because the cork was back in place when the light was reactivated. Remember, only someone entering the open aperture of the source and going into the light directly can be turned into a smoke monster. The ancient incident caused during the Egyptian era necessitated the installation of the stone cork, which blocks the light and uses a water circulation system to stop it from overheating. This system means that creating a smoke monster could never happen again. Because, in order to get to the heart of the island, you need to uncork the source. Yet, by doing that, you then turn the light off. Therefore, Jack was never exposed to the light in its fullest aperture like the Man in Black was 2 millennia ago. No one can be turned into a smoke monster when the cork is in and the light is refracted through the water. Jack was simply transported out of the cave by the light. Had he been transformed like the Man in Black, he wouldn't have been alive following such an event. His body would simply be an empty vessel and his consciousness roaming freely. The Man in Black was the last of his kind. That is why the events of Season 6, and the series in general, proved to be the most crucial in the island's history. It was about ridding the island of its malfunction so that time and existence could flow freely without further threat or surgery. It is heavily implied that Hurley's first action as the new island guardian would be getting Desmond Hume home to his wife Penny, and their son, Charlie. This would likely be accomplished in a very ironic way. Through Libby's generous gift of a boat to Desmond many years previously. The Elizabeth. A mode of transportation that the Man in Black intended to use for his own doomed escape plan. The boat was still anchored offshore. And, presumably, in one piece. Which means Desmond would finally be able to leave the island for good, on the very same boat that brought him to its shores in the first place. Another example of how the tapestry of time has everything in its right place at the right time. Desmond could come home to Penny, who no doubt waits for him back in Los Angeles with their son Charlie. However, his return would be bittersweet. Because while Desmond is alive and well, he also brings news of Charles Widmore's death with him. It is fairly certain that Penny never reconciled with her father before his death on the island and likely has many unresolved feelings towards him. We can only assume that she got to resolve these issues with him in the sideways, off-screen. Desmond and Penny, and their son Charlie, go on to live their lives back on an island of a different kind. The United Kingdom, most likely in Scotland, where they can finally be at peace. Because the island is finally done with Desmond David Hume. Before returning Desmond to his life back in the world, Hurley's immediate order of business would have been to bury the dead. That means all of the victims of the Island War of 2007. Including his friend, Jack Shepherd. I imagine that he would have buried Jack beside Locke on the beach that they once called their home, so the two men of faith could be at rest together, side by side. With Ben's help, Hurley would go on to reconstitute the remaining others on the island. They were not entirely wiped out in the war. Former flight attendant Cindy, and the children, Emma and Zach, are among the surviving remnants. We have to ask the question. Would those poor children finally be returned home to their parents? We shall get into the possibilities of that later. Most of the radicals from the others have been killed off. Long gone are murderous henchmen like Mikhail Bakunin and Danny Pickett. Also gone are religious zealots such as Dogan and Lennon. And political disruptors like Juliet Burke, who wanted to fracture and overturn the leadership. The others are now nothing more than fellow survivors of the final island war. All of whom now turn to Hurley, not just as the island's new deity, but as the active leader of the group. The way it should have always been. No more intermediaries or secrets. Everything is out in the open now. Hurley believes in speaking the truth and he likes to share his power with the people around him. We also know that Hurley eventually leaves the island with Ben to roll up all of the remaining threads that the others had dangling out in the world. Including the Dharma warehouse that had been supplying the men in the hatch with resupply drops for decades. More importantly, Hurley wanted to recruit people who he felt needed the island in the same way the island needed them. Walt was the most important person to bring back. As protector, Hurley would gradually become aware of the source and form a deeper connection to it, just like Jacob and Jack before him. He knows that Michael has fulfilled his destiny as a whisper ghost in helping to get Hurley to Fate Lock's camp. Now it is time to help Michael be released from his service to the island. Only Walt can help Hurley achieve this goal. By bringing back Walt, the father and son could finally meet again and reconcile. And say all the things they never had a chance to say in life. With Walt older and wiser, he could articulate his emotions and find a way to forgive his father. From that catharsis, Michael could finally move on. This is why, in the series epilogue, the new man in charge, Ben tells Walt,
"We need you. You have work to do. Starting with helping your father."
My father's dead.
Doesn't mean you can't help him.
I don't believe that Hurley's quest would stop at freeing Michael. It is my belief that Hurley, being so in tune with talking to the dead, would have made it his mission to free all of the whisper ghosts trapped on the island. Either through helping him personally resolve their unfinished business, or bringing specific people to the island that might help the ghosts find their way into the sideways for rebirth. Hurley was the most spiritually connected protector, with a clear connection to the realm of the dead. This would be something, I feel, he was destined to do. To help clear the island of lost souls and free every last whisper. To fulfill the dream of an island future that was long ago etched into the stone cork. So that silence may reign and we may sleep. To let the dead rest once and for all. Meanwhile, he and Ben would help to train Walt to someday take over the position of protector. As this was heavily alluded to in the epilogue, judging from what we know about Hurley, and how much he loves both his family and friends, he does not want to rule as a guardian for centuries on end like Jacob. Contrary to popular opinion, I don't believe Hurley ruled for hundreds or thousands of years. Remember, Ben specifically says to him,
That's how Jacob ran things. Maybe there's another way. A better way.
It makes sense that Hurley would do things completely differently to his predecessors. He might form a new tradition in which an island protector steps up every decade or so to take the reins, so that each retiring protector can still live a full life and grow old with the ones they love. These are the human considerations that Jacob's way of ruling never allowed him to have. Which was a result of Jacob having no connections to the world. But we know Hurley does have those connections. They are a fundamental part of who he is as a character. Everything we saw happen during Jacob's tenure, including many of the rules, rituals, and traditions, could now be reversed, changed, and completely reordered. It is this channel's speculation that Hurley made the position of island ruler a temporary job going forward. Everything we know about Hugo tells us that he has no interest in outliving all of the people he loves whilst living on for centuries serving the island's will. Because the island is not a place you should spend your entire life. Only a key piece of it. Granted, it will be the most important part of your life. But it is not somewhere a person should be from birth through to death. As demonstrated time and time again on the show, people who spent their entire lives within that snow globe did not lead happy existences. And almost all of them met tragic ends. But all of that death was for a greater purpose. The island was the moth in the cocoon, struggling to emerge. Struggle is nature's way of strengthening it. Hence why everything is different on the island after Jack's sacrifice in the series finale. That was the point of the writers ending the story there. The legacy of Jacob's reign, both the good and the bad, was well and truly over. A new era was beginning, where people could have the chance to live normal lives again, free of conflict and manipulation. Where power could be shared responsibly. In which Jacob's dream of an island Eden representing the best of humanity could finally be realized. By the time Walt is a 30-something man, he would be able to take over the position. In fact, Walt could be taking over the role sometime this very decade. This channel maintains that Walt was the protector that the island needed and wanted next after Hugo Reyes. Someone special with psychic sensitivity, who spent time on the island as a child but also has connections to the real world and to his own humanity and morality. We can further assume that, during Hurley's era in charge, he split his time between the island and his mainland home so he could see his family. It is also possible that he simply brought his mother and father to the island to live with him. If he could convince them to give up the mansion and millions, that is. Either way, Hurley's guardianship will be about making things right with the island again. To put it back on an even keel and to create a community made up of both old and new islanders. Even showrunners Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse like to jokingly imagine that Hurley runs an annual golf tournament called the Dharma Open. It is almost certain that Ben stayed on as the number 2 on the island until he died, serving penance for all the wrong he did throughout his life. Perhaps Hurley helped Ben to communicate with some of his loved ones who had died on the island, such as Roger Linus and Alex Russo. Maybe even his mother, Emily Linus. We know that Ben had an uphill battle ahead of him in terms of redemption and would need all the help and forgiveness he could get. This could be why we saw a nicer, more contrite Ben in the epilogue. There is something more at peace about the man. He is no longer trying to control everything. He finally took on the role that he was best suited for. That of an intermediary and advisor. A strategist. Someone who could support a good leader. And, let's face it, Ben had already learned how to be an advisor from the best intermediary he ever knew. Richard Alpert. Speaking of, Richard most likely never returned to the island again. When the plane takes off in the end, this is his final liberation. He was free from his contract with Jacob. And he almost certainly decided to live out a normal life in which he could grow old in peace, free of the burdens and responsibilities that came with the last 140 years of his life. I can picture Richard returning to his homeland in the Canary Islands to reconnect with his roots, maybe even visit the grave of his beloved Isabella. But what would a man like Richard do for the rest of his days in a long overdue retirement? Perhaps he would simply want to keep running Mythos Bioscience and helping shield the island from the outside world. But I prefer to think that the best job for a man like Richard would be doing something related to the past, whether that be working in a museum as a curator of old antiquities, or teaching history to others. Putting his first-hand knowledge of the past to good use. As for the other characters that departed on the Ajira flight in the finale, this is certainly where the most insane conjectures and theories will come into play. Because how in the world can Frank Lapidus and his skeleton manifest of surviving passengers possibly explain where they have been and why they are riding so light? And how did the flight pick up several people who were declared legally dead years ago, such as Claire Littleton and James Ford? Furthermore, what became of Kate? She broke the one stipulation of her probation following her trial suspension. She had to remain in the state of California for 10 years. There are two wildly different options for what happened to Ajira Flight 316 following its departure from the island. Option 1. They go off-grid. The group decide in mid-flight to land somewhere in secret. Frank would need to deactivate the plane transponder and black box in order to buy themselves time to hash out a plan of action on what comes next. Everyone would have to agree to spend the rest of their lives in hiding and never tell of their experiences to the world. Which means they need money and fake passports. Richard Alpert might be able to help them with this by using Mythos money. Sawyer would know how to create and sustain fake identities. Kate would know how to run and where to hide. Frank could transport everyone to where they needed to go. Maybe Mexico. Or even Canada. Following this stealth return, Frank could go back to the Bahamas to live off-grid but continue to pilot flying tours, off the books, in Eleuthera, where we first met him. The irony being that, after years of believing in conspiracy theories, he finally gets to live out his days as being a member of a legitimate, real-life conspiracy. Miles could reintegrate into the world back in California because it is unlikely that anyone knew he was missing. Furthermore, he is now in possession of diamonds that are worth millions. And good for him. Someone got rich out of this whole ordeal, and Miles wanted it the most. Meanwhile, Claire would need to find a way to reunite with her mother and Aaron by rendezvousing somewhere in secret. Perhaps Claire, Kate and Aaron would form a nuclear family whilst living in Mexico with Uncle Sawyer. There is a kind of Shawshank Redemption warmth to such a thought. The sense of a bittersweet ending. Our remaining losties get to stay together but they can never return to a semblance of a normal life. All of this requires the suspension of disbelief in spades. But, it is also plausible within Lost's universe of implausible ideas. Although many nagging questions remain about this scenario. Can Kate truly hide anymore? She is one of the most famous faces in the world as a member of the Oceanic Six. Made even more famous by the fact that she once again disappeared on a missing airplane with other members of the Oceanic Six. The media would be doing somersaults over the story. Perhaps Kate might not be recognized in a place like Mexico, or somewhere remote, but surely it would be incredibly unlikely that she could go the rest of her life without being noticed by someone, caught on camera and exposed. Can the Ajira flight really avoid air traffic detection and land somewhere in total secret without being found out? Where would our surviving losties go in the short term? Would they all really agree to remain legally dead or missing, and never again reintegrate with society as themselves? Maybe Sawyer might be willing to do this since he has a history of becoming other people, but would Frank Lapidus? Would Claire Littleton? And wasn't the whole point of Kate Austen's arc that she was going to stop running? Does this hypothetical scenario undermine her journey as a character? Surely, if they wanted to stay hidden forever they should have stayed on the island. Why would the writers have them leave at all if these characters are just going to spend the rest of their lives trying to hide from the world anyway? The inference we take from Ajira taking off in the end, and with no one looking back, is that none of them are going to return to this place now they have left it. The very notion that our remaining losties would all have to go into hiding and continue to lie and run away from both the truth and the world at large just seems like the antithesis of what the implications were in the series finale. Does this also undermine the key themes of Season 4 and 5, in regards to the consequences suffered by the Oceanic Six when it came to their lies and cover-ups? Imagining what becomes of our Ajira survivors is not just about factoring in plot plausibility, but also of the show's overall themes. What would fulfill the character arcs in a more truthful way? Having said all that, this first option of what happened to the Ajira passengers is actually the cleaner, easier answer. Because it does not have to deal with the even more difficult questions raised by Ajira's re-emergence in the public sphere. So, let's explore this second, more complicated, and frankly, more interesting scenario of what would happen if the Ajira survivors didn't try to run and hide from the world. What if they confronted everything head-on? Let's imagine that Ajira 316 escapes the snow globe around the island and, within a few hours of flight time across the vast ocean, it suddenly pops up on an air traffic control radar. Then let's say that Frank establishes communications with the nearest airport's control tower. He brings in the plane for an emergency landing, extremely behind schedule after having been missing for 2 weeks. Within an hour of the Ajira flight's reappearance, there would be hundreds of people in the loop. Mostly airline officials, immediately followed by alerts to the media and a proceeding feeding frenzy over what happened. Multiple embassies would have to involve themselves in this matter due to a number of missing international passengers from the flight. Our Ajira passengers would be taken into custody and detained for questioning. The truth is, there is no cover story they can use to explain away the many discrepancies of their situation. If they land at an active airport, there is simply no cover-up that can be implemented to obfuscate the reality of where they have been and what they have been through. They must learn from the mistakes of the Oceanic Six. And tell the truth. The surviving group would almost certainly be led by Kate and Sawyer. Two characters who have learned to lead others over the course of the 6 seasons. They would lay out the events that led them to where they are now. With support from their pilot, Frank Lapidus, and respected mythology head honcho, Richard Alpert, and the airplane's flight data recorder, they would unfurl the series of events that had taken place. Perhaps they omit Jacob and the man in black from the tale, and leave out the more fantastical details of the collective narrative. It is impossible to say for sure how they might tackle questions or how much of the story they explain. Whichever version of events they unfurl to officials, their story is lent extra veracity thanks to the presence of Sawyer and Claire. Both of whom had been declared legally dead some years ago in the fake plane wreckage orchestrated by Charles Widmore. Also, if Cindy, Zach and Emma were returned home with Desmond by Hurley on the boat, then there would no doubt be more proof to back up these claims. That there is an island in which they had all been living on, where a war between two tribal forces already living on it had taken place and killed many people. And that the Oceanic Six had gone back to rescue the people they left behind only to suffer more casualties. This would expose all of the lies and cover-ups surrounding the Oceanic Six. Although how much of this would be disseminated to the press and the public is open to further speculation. Maybe only some of the details of the Ajira story get out. There is no indication during Ben's visit to the mainland in the epilogue that the impact from Ajira's re-emergence has created such shockwaves. But we do not know how many years have passed at this point. Walt is a young man now. So, the epilogue is likely taking place in 2010, at the time when it was actually filmed. Which means the Ajira group have been home for, at least, 3 years. We have to really consider what the consequences would be from telling the truth in this scenario. Our Ajira group would be in custody and questioned for days, possibly weeks, about the whole affair. Would their tales of the island suddenly revive a new race to find it amongst the various governments in the know? How much do some of them know already? The U.S. military has long since been aware of the island's existence, as has the Hanso Foundation, and various other business interests. Or would the Ajira story simply not be believable enough to the general authorities involved regardless of any proof that was shared? Would the truth of what happened ultimately be obfuscated somehow, or even buried altogether before it could get out? It is easy to imagine these details being withheld from the public and it creating gossip, rumors and myths about what really happened to the Oceanic 815 and Ajira 316 passengers, perpetuated by conspiracy theorists on the internet. The fact of the matter is, even the most watered-down version of the Oceanic and Ajira stories would be incredibly hard for most people to swallow. It is fascinating to consider this scenario for many reasons. But mainly because it throws up so many dramatic possibilities. We know that the living world continues long after Jack's death, which means other conflicts, adventures and storylines no doubt took place on and around the island. This is somewhat alluded to between Hurley and Ben in the flash sideways when they pay their respects to one another. They must have encountered new dilemmas and battles of their own, whether they were related to the Ajira group's reappearance in the world or not. It wouldn't matter how many people from the outside world knew about the island's existence at this point in the game anyway. Because the only people who ever find the island are those that are allowed to find it by the Protector, or are supposed to find it. And since it is always moving, and Hurley is ruling over its shores as a peaceful guardian, world governments and the military-industrial complex are unlikely to ever be able to track it down. It could be argued that the reason why Ben is shutting everything down in the epilogue is in order to prevent anyone using Dharma technology to track the island now that the Ajira story is out there. To those in the know, the only place capable of locating the island was the lamp post station in Los Angeles, which had been under Eloise Hawking's control. What the epilogue suggests to us is that Ben is actually shutting down all remaining Dharma operations. Which means the lamp post would also be shut down and sealed off for good. Following the bureaucratic, public relations nightmare of Ajira's return, and all the questions and investigations that would come with it, the passengers would no doubt have stuck together and presented a united front on their story. Their return might prove controversial and confusing to the world at large, but they would have eventually been allowed to return to their lives. Because, with the exception of Kate having broken the terms of her probation and perjuring herself, they have committed no crimes. In fact, most of them are survivors of pretty traumatic events. Would the district attorney's office want to pursue a prosecution of Kate Austen for a second time on the grounds of probation violation? Perhaps, but it would be legally untenable. Especially since Kate risked her own life and freedom to bring back other survivors and is still considered a hero by many. If she had to serve any jail time for absconding, it would have been a token, minimal amount. Once her legal problems are dealt with, I have no doubt that Kate would have informed the families of the Oceanic Six about the deaths of their loved ones. It would be a very emotionally fraught and painful series of visits. But I cannot imagine another character doing this. Kate was connected to all of these people in very meaningful ways. News of his daughter's death, for a second time, no doubt deeply affected Mr. Paik. How could he not blame himself for how things ended for both Sun and Jin? Perhaps, the silver lining here, is that he would have raised his granddaughter with all the love and compassion he never showed his daughter growing up. Gion was his second chance to be a better father figure and a better man. We can only but hope. Hell, if Benjamin Linus can make a turnaround, so can Mr. Paik. I cannot imagine Jack's mother ever getting over the second disappearance and actual death of her son. I feel bad for her the most out of everyone. Not only is her husband gone, but so is her son. Again, it's just an impossibly tragic situation for her, and one that will weigh upon her for the rest of her life. The small ray of light within her minor background story comes from the fact she gets to spend time with Jack again in the sideways, and perhaps moves on with Christian off-screen. Claire would reunite with Aaron, finally. But she would also need help in recovering from the psychological traumas of the past 3 years left alone with the man in black. All of his poison and influence would take some time to wring out of her. I have no doubts that Kate would help Claire every step of the way. Aaron's confusion about who his mother is would remain a point of contention going forward, but children are malleable. Eventually, he would have been able to view Kate as an aunt and Claire as his true mother. There have been cases like this happening in real life. These confusing family ties can be untangled and the wounds from the truth can heal. If you are inclined to believe that Kate was indeed pregnant with Jack's child, as discussed in Chapter 15 on the Flash Sideways, and that she gave birth to David Shepard 8 months later, then that is where her post-Island story takes her. I know that this theory remains somewhat divisive in the fanbase, but it is such a beautiful, bittersweet notion that I would like to embrace it for the purposes of this hypothetical scenario. I think we can all agree that, whatever the scenario, Sawyer would definitely reconnect with Cassidy and help to raise their daughter, Clementine, in some way. To be present in this girl's life. Juliet changed him fundamentally as a man. She made him whole. As for whether or not Sawyer would rekindle a romance with Kate. Again, this is a divisive speculation that divides many fans who were deeply invested in the love stories of Lost. I am not so certain anything would happen between them for a very long time, if ever. Both had lost the loves of their life within a short space of time following their departure from the island. Sawyer lost Juliet, then Kate lost Jack. That takes a long time to get over. It is possible that they rekindle a romance with each other years later. There is no particular reason why they could not be intimate after they have had time to deal with their pain. But there is also something mature and beautiful about the idea that they simply become close friends, who have each other's backs into old age. In both scenarios, the key commonality is that a lot of our characters would either be having or reconnecting with their own children. Children who might become the next generation of island travelers. In adulthood, Jeon would break away from South Korea and her grandparents to find out the truth of exactly what happened to her mother and father. I imagine she would seek out Sun and Jin's friends from the island, such as Kate, Claire, Sawyer and Desmond. Through them she would meet Aaron Littleton, Clementine Phillips, Charlie Hume, and, if you subscribe to the idea, David Shepard. Many fans have theorized, for some time, that this next generation of Losties would form friendships as a result of the connections of their parents. Each one would have a motivation to seek out the island. They would ultimately be brought together under Walt Dawson's leadership to be part of the next generation of others. This is the only way I could ever envision a potential spin-off series working within the Lost universe. New adventures for a new generation. But Lost, as it currently stands, is a complete work. To definitively fill in these missing pieces, would take away from our ability to imagine our own stories. But what do you think? There are no right or wrong answers here. The writers left this part of the story wide open for us to co-author our own continuations of certain character arcs and to imagine new stories. Please share your own theories and ideas in the comments. Maybe there is a third scenario of how things could play out. Or a fourth or a fifth. Perhaps the possibilities of what happened after Ajira left the island are truly limitless. What is important to note with these postscript speculations is that they are not all happy endings. Just because these people left the island doesn't mean everything will instantly work out for them going home. In either scenario. Because life goes on. Our struggles continue, in different forms. The fight between the light and the dark within ourselves never ends. Until it all ends.
It only ends once. Anything that happens before that, it's just progress.
Life itself is about struggle. We have to try and find the meaning in our own actions. by taking responsibility for the choices we make, and learning to let go of the past mistakes and traumas that shaped us, so we can be our best selves in the present and going into the future. And, who knows, maybe you might find your soulmates along the way. Sometimes, a friend can turn into a foe. And other times, an enemy can become an ally. You will lose people you care about along the way. It is inevitable, but with every passing day, there comes new opportunities. And new love. Every other moment is another chance to do something differently. To make a different choice. To move forward, instead of back. You can't change the past, but you can own it, and learn from it. Lost taught us that moving on is a long and involved process of letting go. But it also taught us that people who find themselves lost in their lives can always be found. Whether it be through your work, community, friendship, or the very act of love itself. Most of these things can be found in the everyday world, but, for the characters of Lost, they found them on the island. They found purpose, they found emotional catharsis, and self-actualization. They found redemption. They found love. They found each other. And the lucky ones who lived beyond the finale got to take that back to the world with them. They leave as better, more complete people than when they first arrived. And these characters live on, not just in the outside world, but within the source too. Because time has no meaning there. It is eternal, just like a great story. As long as we carry it with us, it will never truly die. Thank you for watching. Stay lost.